Just the facts, ma'am.
Most people are going to find these facts very, very disturbing and downright horrifying. I'm going to start off by explaining the basic procedures for organ harvesting. Then I will show you some official documents from organ procurement organizations that turn out the guidelines and protocols to verify that what I said is in fact true. After that, I'm going to go a little bit over the current laws, because if you do want to avoid being harvested, you need to know what the laws are and take specific steps. Vital organs are harvested two different ways. 90% of the time, they are taken from a body that is living and breathing, and the individual's been diagnosed as brain dead. And from the brain dead, they can get each type of organ. They can get hearts, livers, lungs, intestines, etc. 5 to 10% of the time, they do take them from people that have undergone cardiac death, although in that case, they can typically only harvest kidneys and livers, and the death has to happen under controlled circumstance. So what they do is they take ventilator-dependent individuals that have agreed to this, or that are brain damaged and their families agreed to turn the ventilator off. They set them up on an operating table, then they turn the ventilator off and they wait for them to die. As soon as the heart stops, they time 3 to 5 minutes after, and they start cutting. And this is also tricky because the person has to die in a timely manner, typically within 1 hour for most hospitals. And if they don't die in that hour, they're supposed to be taken back to their room to die naturally, at which point all of the organs are lost. They cannot be harvested. The organ harvesting procedure for people that are brain dead typically takes about 4 to 6 hours. And during that time, they are kept on the ventilator, their heart is beating, they're breathing the entire time, until usually at the end the heart is the last organ that's taken, at which point they die. These brain dead individuals do not receive any anesthesia. However, they are given paralytic drugs, and that's because when they start to cut them open, typically they do in fact move. In addition, their vital signs typically start to spike as soon as the cutting starts. Under normal circumstances, if you went in for surgery and your vital signs spiked when the surgeon cut you, the anesthesiologist would take that as a sign that you're not under deeply enough, and he would increase your level of anesthesia. In the case of these people diagnosed brain dead, they just don't worry about it. Now, you may think it doesn't matter if these people receive painkillers or anesthesia, because they use very sophisticated tests to ensure that they are in fact brain dead. In reality, that is hardly the case. In layman's terms, the tests they run would be the equivalent of checking to see if someone's breathing, poking them with a stick, shining a light in their eyes to see if their pupils respond, and maybe shooting some cold water in their ear, and that's it. In fact, the OPOs, the organ procurement manuals that come out that tell hospitals how to run these tests, actually discourage the use of EEGs or nuclear brain flow studies or any sophisticated test unless they have to do it because the rudimentary test cannot be completed. Many individuals have woken up after they were declared brain dead. In some cases, they've woken up after they were scheduled for organ harvesting procedures, and in others, at least one, they woke up on the operating table as the doctors were getting ready to harvest their organs. And in many cases, these people are not even brain damaged. There's a number of conditions that are known to mimic brain death. In some cases, the condition leaves them completely alert and awake, but unable to move, and so without sophisticated tests, these people look like their brain is shot. And they know this. This is a statistical reality. Yet nevertheless, the hospitals and the OPOs are fine using rudimentary tests and just taking the chance that a certain percentage are likely to be cut up alive without anesthesia. Alright, so now for the proof regarding the lack of anesthesia and the brain death testing. There are approximately 57 federally licensed organ procurement organizations operating across the U.S. And in each case, these OPOs get a set of hospitals in their area, and those hospitals are legally bound to notify the OPO every time they have a patient that could be brain dead or that is expected to die imminently. Now, these OPOs turn out these official guidebooks telling the hospital what drugs to use, what procedures to use as far as brain death testing, etc. And the hospitals, for the most part, always adhere to these standards. First OPO guide is from LifeGift in Houston, Texas. Clearly states paralytic agents for spinal reflexes will be administered. Other anesthetic not needed. The next guide is from One Legacy out of Los Angeles, California. Take note of that name. You're going to hear about them again later. Organ recovery from the brain-dead donor does not require administration of anesthetic. However, it may be necessary to give paralytic agents to suppress spinal reflexes. And last but not least, we have LifeSource out of St. Paul, Minnesota. Same story, paralytic agents for spinal reflexes is given and other anesthetic not needed. And now let's take a quick look at what one anesthesiologist said about harvesting without anesthesia. The nurses get really, really upset. You stick the knife in and the pulse and blood pressure shoot up. If you don't give anything at all, the patient will start moving and wriggling around and it is impossible to do the operation. The surgeon has always asked us to paralyze the patient. And here we get into the recommended brain death test and clinical exam. Pupils fixed when you shine a light in their eyes. Absent corneal reflex, that would be if you poke them in the eye, do they blink? Absent oculocephalic response. Apparently, if you move their head around, their eyes should continue to return to normal. Absent oculovestibule reflex, cold calorics. That means if you shoot cold water in their ear, their eyes are supposed to move in a certain direction. Absent cough or gag reflex. Absent motor response, poke them with a stick. And last, absent respiratory effort, meaning can they breathe? Okay, so what about confirmatory tests like an EEG? These tests are optional. However, they should be performed if unable to complete an apnea test. Apnea test is the breathing test. Then it goes on to say, conventional approach is to conduct two clinical tests several hours apart to confirm brain death, or to do a clinical test and then use one of these other tests like brain scan. However, the physician may opt to only conduct one clinical exam, which basically means if you get the answer we want on one test, then let's stop right there and not do any more testing. And notice the last line, which is hugely important for anyone that's an actual donor signed up right now. LifeSource usually becomes involved with the clinical management following the first brain death exam. And the next procedural guidebook, you can see it's exactly the same thing. I won't even bother reading it. Only real difference is this one says that other testing should be ordered only if the clinical exam cannot be performed. So, same deal. So now let's look at some conditions that mimic brain death. Locked-in syndrome, and in that case the people are actually perfectly conscious and alert, they just appear brain dead from the outside. Neuromuscular paralysis, hypothermia, drug intoxication, and Guillain-Barré syndrome. Drug intoxication is a huge one right now, because something like 25% of the brain-dead organ donors are people that have overdosed on opiates. And from what I've read, neurologists suggest that you need to wait at least 7 to 10 days before you diagnose someone like that has that many drugs in their system as being brain dead. Only problem is, I've also read that 97 to 99% of adults that are actually brain dead, meaning the brain stem itself has died, will die on a respirator from a heart attack within about a week, because the brainstem also controls your electrolytes and your body temperature, and it sends them into heart attacks. So you have to ask yourself, do you think folks really want to wait 7 to 10 days to see if these opiate overdose victims die of a heart attack and all their organs are ruined, or do you think maybe they want to speed things up a little? I tell you, after you read or after I show you some of the case studies, the answer I think is going to be pretty obvious in a lot of cases. And it's widely acknowledged in medical communities that the whole concept of brain death was invented after they realized that to have the best organ transplant success, you had to harvest the organs from a living, breathing body. Before that, brain death didn't exist. You were either dead or you were in a deep coma. And the doctors, if you look into it, they're open about this. They know these people are not completely brain dead. I mean, some of them might be, but if they are, they're going to die very, very quickly on their own. Okay, so now for some important legal information so you understand what you need to do if you want to prevent your organs from being harvested. All states use a version of the Uniform Anatomical Gift Act. Well, what is that? It's this group of lawyers that writes what they believe, or more accurately, what the OPOs and organ harvesters believe would be the ideal state law governing organ harvesting. And they write up this generic law, and then they hand it to each state and say, you need to pass this so that you can save more lives. And then the states generally vote on it and pass it unanimously without even really understanding what the law entails. The first one was written in 1968, then 86, then 2006, and since then they are turning out revised amendments every year pretty much. And every single time it gives the OPOs more rights, more power. So in 2006 there was a major change. Up until that point, the family ultimately had the final say as to whether organs would be harvested. In 2006 they changed that. They said the donor his rights will be protected. So if he's registered as a donor, the family has no right to give consent or retract consent. Well, what does that really mean? We looked at the brain death testing guidelines, right? They can diagnose you as brain dead and legally dead after one clinical test. The moment that happens, guess who takes control of your health care? The OPO does, because you just became a cadaver. And legally, they have the right to manage the cadaver until the organs are harvested. So if your family wants more tests, legally, that's just too bad. Their rights have been severed at that point. The only rights they do have is to get your corpse back after the organs have been taken out for burial. It was a case in Ohio where 21-year-old signed up as an organ donor on his driver's license. He got hit by a car and was declared brain dead. The family did not want his organs harvested. They wanted him taken off the ventilator to see if he could breathe on his own. The OPO went to a judge and got the court order to harvest his organs. I think the family found out after it had been done, and they were not too happy. And yes, it was a live breathing body organ harvesting procedure. Since 2006, the newer versions have even more laws that benefit the organ harvesters. For instance, number 3, it used to be that minors or parents would have to agree to harvesting, but now any 15 or 16-year-old kid that can apply for a driver's license can sign up as an organ donor, and their parents are not going to have any say in it. And in addition, number 4, it used to be only next of kin. If you were not a donor, only next of kin could, sign your organs away and let you be harvested alive. But now they've changed it to include any adult who has exhibited special care and concern for the decedent. So if they can't get your family members, they can, I guess if a neighbor or a coworker visits you in the hospital, they can say that person showed special care for you, and now that your neighbor or coworker could sign off and let your organs be harvested. It's unbelievable. And every year, they're coming out with more laws that benefit these people. Now, in all fairness, there is a hierarchy. In other words, first they ask the spouse or the parents. If they're not available, then they go to siblings. They can't just run off and get your neighbor to sign up if your spouse said no. But everything in these laws is so incredibly vague. They say that they need to reach this person in a reasonable amount of time. Well, what the hell does that mean? They left a voicemail and they didn't respond for 30 minutes, so now they're going to another family member? It's all very vague, and it all benefits the OPOs. Okay, so how can you prevent having your organs harvested against your will? Well, first off, obviously get off any donor registries that you're currently on. And if you've moved from another state recently, make sure you're off the other state's registry too, just to be safe. Secondly, understand they're going to drop your name. They're not going to list you as refusing to donate, because that goes against their interests. Then you need to get a form. I wish I could give you links to forms, like in your state, but I can't find that many, and I'm not a lawyer, so I don't even want to tell you which one would be best. If I were doing one, I would just use a generic one like this, because I can't find any specific for Georgia. You want it signed. You want it in your wallet with your driver's license. You want to make sure relatives have it. You want to make sure if you have to check into a hospital for surgery, they've got a copy of it, because it's really only paper documents that are going to save you in this situation. Some sources say you should also have it signed by 2 independent witnesses, but then other sources say that's not necessary, so it's your call. It is also a good idea to have at least one tough, ornery relative that understands this, has a copy of it, and will speak on your behalf. That way, if the OPO or a hospital started giving someone a hard time, your relative can throw this paper in their face and threaten to sue the whole lot of them. In addition, it'd probably be a good idea to threaten to go to the media and make the OPO and the hospital look like a bunch of sociopathic, organ-stealing monsters. The one thing these people do not like is bad publicity. And when you look at their procedure guidelines, they also have a section just on basically how to pressure the family. So a weaker family member would have a really hard time standing up against these people. No member of the donation team, the doctor, the nurse, social worker, chaplain, should mention donation to a family before participating in a team huddle. The team huddle assembles as many direct caregivers as possible prior to the family approach and creates a forum for exchanging information about the donor and the donor family. So the OPO agent gathers all the information she can by talking to everyone involved, and that way she can create the perfect approach to talk these people into signing the papers. In addition, if you look further down, the Joint Commission regulations and state law state that only a LifeGift donation coordinator may discuss donation with the family. So they've actually passed a law that these hospitals, the nurses, the doctors, they are not allowed to bring it up, because they might say the wrong thing, or God forbid, they might warn people against it. And if there are any Canadian or European viewers that think American laws are crazy, be warned, a lot of European countries are even worse. They're going with opt-out laws, which means everyone by default is an organ donor unless they sign paperwork stating they refuse. And I believe those laws also apply to tourists. So if you're planning to visit France anytime soon, you might want to spend a few bucks and get travel insurance. Because with travel insurance, if you get injured, they actually do life flight you back to your country of origin. Alright, so I am not going to include any specific cases in this video. This video is long enough. I will say I came across so many, and I just did a follow-up video that highlights two that are particularly interesting. There are so many where they end up in criminal cases or investigations by the U.S. Health Department. And these cases involve, we're talking drug overdoses, they're falsifying hospital records, they're telling the families all kinds of things that are absolutely not true to get these people to sign paperwork for harvesting. So I'm going to link the video that I just did with two cases. One of them is just fascinating. It's a homicide investigation that's currently going on in Los Angeles. And the interesting part about it is the document that was filed in court alleges that there has been a long-term conspiracy between the Los Angeles Coroner's Department and One Legacy, the OPO in Los Angeles. And it strongly suggests that they have been overdosing cardiac death patients with massive amounts of drugs, and the coroner's office has been covering up for it, allegedly. But it is a current homicide investigation, and that's really interesting. So I'm linking that video. It's a good watch. There's no boring legal stuff in it. It's a very interesting story. Okay? Thank you so much for watching this. I put a little poll up if you want to vote on if this changed your mind about organ donation, and stay safe.